Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I am Al, and today we have elite apologist, the other Paul, joining us from all the way down under. How are things in Australia, by the way, Paul?
I'm completely flattered by that title of elite apologist, and it is going fine. It's a bit of a cloudy today, but otherwise a decent morning. It's going pretty well.
Well, that's good to hear. As long as it's not cold, We just got a bunch of snow this weekend, which is not fun, up here.
Honestly, I'd much prefer that to the muggy heat we have.
Oh, okay. I might hold you to that. All right. Well, so both Paul and I, we share things in common, and we disagree with some things. Like for example, one thing we disagree: iconodulia. He's in the Gavin Ortland camp, and I am currently I'm Catholic, right? We accept Nicaea too. But one of the things we agree with wholeheartedly, and we encourage others to do, is to do research with primary or early sources, early chronicles, early historiography, and it's something that surprisingly not a lot of people do. Not a lot of people do it. It's very depressing, and I know Paul and I want that to change, and that's part of this reason. We're each going to give our top 5 early chronicles. We're both covering different periods. He's covering Christ to about 600. I'm going 600 to about 1200, and yeah, we're going to give our top 5. And yeah, it's not only our favorite books, but also recommended reading for you guys. Because apart from the first book of mine are pretty cheap. I mean, there's one you'll spend $100 on if you buy it, but that's 100 Canadian dollars, by the way. So about 90 American or 85 American or something like that. But apart from that, they're all dirt cheap. I don't know what book Paul's have. Are they cheap or?
I mean, actually, relatively speaking, yeah, I was actually surprised, even though it's quite niche. The Philostorgius book isn't that expensive. Spoiler alert, by the way, people. Probably the most expensive one would maybe be the second one I'm going to recommend, from Lucian of Samosata, because that's like a Loeb classical library one. So those tend to be a bit pricey, but probably not even as much as 100 though, from memory.
Okay. All right. So do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'm keen to go first.
All right. Let's do it.
Excellent. So first, highly recommended source, especially an absolutely essential, unavoidable source if you are studying early church history. Well, a little bit of a cheat, but in general, the volume, the Apostolic Fathers, Greek text, English translations, get that. Got all the earliest non-biblical Christian texts, absolutely essential in Greek and English. You can get an English-only version as well, but having the OG language there as well is very, very, very good, because you should, if you have the time and ability, study OG languages as much as you can. But otherwise, specifically, what I want to recommend is the letter of First Clement within it, which I believe, well, really, depending on where you go with, I follow the early dating scheme, so I do believe it was actually written before the destruction of the temple in AD 70. So in other words, our earliest extra biblical Christian source, and it hits all the notes. It's not only insanely early, middle of the 1st century, but it's also really long, 66 chapters, goes into lots and lots of detail on issues, on various theological issues, because the primary thing it's responding to is a schism in the city of Corinth. Well, not really a schism, but like some people trying to overthrow their presbyters in Corinth. And so it's responding to that situation. And it gives lots and lots and lots of insight into basically how the early Christians, particularly in the city of Rome, read scripture, how they interpreted it. And what's amazing is how, especially when it gets to sections where it's more or less drawing from Paul's scriptures, it echoes his language really, really closely. And so I think a massive value of the letter in that respect, because of its earliness and how basically, if it's written when it was, then the people behind it, because I believe, well, not only that Clement himself, Clement of Rome, was behind it, but also the wider Roman hierarchy. But in either case, wherever one you go with, given the early date, it is basically a fact that they would have interacted with the apostles Paul and Peter. And so you are getting the interpretation and understanding of good chunks of scripture, whether Old Testament, but especially even Paul's letters, in the first century. And so this is, First Clement is, for me, like the excellent ideal case of a truly authoritative extra-biblical tradition, not infallible or anything, but otherwise truly authoritative, in that this is from people who are in the audience that these writings were intended for. And so what they say has extremely, extremely high weight. And you're going to have a big problem if you try to go against how they read letters directed to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I highly, highly recommend First Clement. Super early, super useful. Even directly attests to the martyrdoms of Peter and Paul. And actually, it's part of the case for why an early date of pre-70 as opposed to mid-90s AD, which is still crazy early. That's why it's preferred, because it talks about Peter and Paul as being men from their own generation, which wouldn't make much sense coming from the 90s, because there'd still be people who knew Peter and Paul alive in the 90s, but they'd be much more in the older crowd, much more of a minority. So it makes much more sense in a pre-70 date to do that. And so overall, First Clement, get it if you're interested in church history. It is an example of great historical data, but also truly, for a Protestant perspective, truly authoritative tradition.
So, Paul, do you want to maybe explain, if you purchase like a package of Apostolic Fathers, apart from Clement, who you're going to get in that? In most cases?
Sure. I'll actually I'll read the table of contents to you. So, again, excellent book. This Apostolic Fathers set is like, it's in my opinion the perfect archetype of how a collection of historical sources on a certain topic or in a certain period should be done, because it has introductions to the sources on various basic issues. It shows you the manuscripts that they dealt with. It has the original language with the English, and it gives notes on translation as well as notes on text critical data. Everything you need. It's absolutely incredible. So the stuff that it includes is First Clement, Second Clement, the 7 authentic letters of Ignatius, the letter of Polycarp to the Philippians, the martyrdom of Polycarp, the Didache, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle to Diognetus, and what's called the fragment of Quadratus, and the fragments of Papias. So absolutely, absolutely incredible set. Highly recommend it. But otherwise, more specifically, First Clement, get it and read it.
Yeah, no, that's like a solid set, because I mean, like, First Clement and all those other people you knew, if they didn't know an apostle themselves, and they probably did, they
Almost, I reckon that's like certain, basically.
Apostle. So it's as early and early as you can get. Like, you got the New Testament, that's right after,
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to start with my first one here. Now, mine, I knew my top 4 right away, but the fifth one, I had it narrowed down between like 3 or 4 of them, but I decided to do this, and I'm not I tried to stay away from primary sources on the Crusades, because that's kind of another, it's a sister topic, but this does have some Crusades in it, and this is O City of Byzantium, the Annals of Nicetas Cognatus, because and a chronicle from 1118 to 1207. Now, this is expensive. It'll cost you about 85 American. When people think of medieval Christianity, they think of scholastic theologians, crusades, powerful popes excommunicating kings, and all that stuff is true, but people tend to forget that there's a whole, during the medieval period, there's a whole Christian empire to the east. It's still in the east, holding the line against Islam. And through the 12th century, you have very important emperors. This starts in 1118. If you know Byzantine history, that's the year Alexius Comnenus died, and it goes to 1207. Now it's got other things in this besides church history, like military history, current events in Constantinople and elsewhere, but there's a ton of church history too. There's some theological significance to 1204. This is a Greek eyewitness to the 1204 events in Constantinople. And it has to do, it talks about the establishment of the patriarch and how it's kind of interesting because he views the Latin patriarch as the legit patriarch. He complains about him. So, and then eventually there's a successor state takes Constantinople back in 1261. And people just assumed that those were patriarchs in exile. But back then, they viewed the Latin patriarch as the patriarch of Constantinople. Something else involving the church. A lot of people don't know this, but the emperors of Byzantium were the head of the church. It's not the patriarch. It's not the college of bishops. It was the emperor. And if you pick up this book, it has examples of the emperor binding the Christians to certain doctrines, sometimes against the will of the majority of the bishops, and sometimes things that affect the church even to this day in 2022, specifically the Greek Orthodox Church. And so, yeah, no, it's very important. Again, it's expensive. You're going to break the bank to do this. So only purchase this if you're a big geek like I am, or Paul is on church history. And yeah, no, a thing I like to remind people, when you think of the medieval Christianity, always remember, until the 15th century, there is a Christian state in the East. It has not been completely overrun until 1453. So, yeah, that's my first book, O City of Byzantium, the Annals of Nicetas Cognatus, who is himself a monk.
Sweet as. Okay. I'll definitely put that on my list if I ever go up into medieval Byzantine history one day.
It's fun stuff.
All right. My next one is an interesting one. It is a specific work by Lucian of Samosata. So he was a 2nd century pagan satirist, and he actually did write one work mocking the Christians with like an alleged account of someone like taking advantage of Christian hospitality and that. But one work of his, which is extremely valuable, like insanely valuable, is his specific work called How to Write History. And it is the only surviving work of its kind in all of antiquity, a specific work dedicated to the proper writing and process of history, and historical method, basically. Like, you get other writers who they'll comment on those issues and say what you should and shouldn't do, but it's always in the context of like some other thing, typically like an existing historical work, for example. But this is specifically, and this contains more. This volume of Loeb, by the way, contains more than just that, but it's at the very beginning. This in particular is dedicated to the question how to write history, and he does that with the key things like, well, basically, what do you do? What should your disposition be? He has really good comments on basically the historian is in a way like a friend to no one. He will praise his enemies and he'll criticize his friends. All that stuff, total impartiality. And he actually points to, because he's a satirist, so he likes to mock people, he'll actually point to specific examples either from his time or from the past of people who do history badly in various ways. And so the extreme value in this comes from both it's genuinely good even today for learning how you should approach the study and the writing of history, but also the big historical value of it is that it is a really big, complete demonstration of how at least one ancient mind, likely more, thought about the nature of history as a genre, what you're supposed to do in it, how it works. So it's an absolutely excellent source that way. I highly recommend anybody get it, anybody read it. I actually did a while ago a stream basically breaking down the work and its value for us. So yeah, highly recommend it if you're a historically oriented guy, and whether you want to study history yourself because it has genuinely good stuff to say about that, or if you just want to know how the ancients conceived of history, this is a must purchase. Lucian of Samosata, How to Write History.
Wow, that's intriguing, actually.
It is.
So, like, approximately, how much does that one cost, if you don't mind?
Let me look it up now.
The Canadian dollar and Australian dollar are very close, actually. Australian dollar is 95 cents Canadian, so our dollar's worth a tiny bit more than yours, but pretty close. A lot closer than, say, Canada and America.
Yeah. Okay. So this is specifically Loeb Classical Library, Lucian, Volume 6. It includes How to Write History, but then also like a bunch of other works of his as well. And it is $31 on Book Depository.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Okay. Really, really worth it.
Oh, wonderful. No, I'm certainly going to be getting that one. I kind of, for about 15 years, I've been keeping a diary. It's my contribution to history. So after I'm gone, people can read my chronicle.
Oh, I see.
So I don't know if I've been doing it right according to Lucian, though, but we will see. I'm excited to read that one, actually. All right, my number 2, we're staying out east for at least one more book, is the Alexiad by Anna Komnene. Now, this book, if you recall, this book starts in 1118. This book ends in 1118. Why? Because it's a biography of Alexius Comnenus, where these focus on John and Manuel Comnenus. And again, of course, the emperor's head of the church. You got the important state in the east. He's the one. It's a Greek account of the First Crusade. Of course, it's a lot more than theological stuff, like politics, military, and other stuff. But it's got theological stuff. He actually heads the Inquisition. Again, emperor's head of the church, right? In this, he heads the Inquisition against a group of Gnostics called the Pogomils toward the end of his life.
The Pogomils, yeah.
Yeah, they're this really sketchy group. But yeah, no, and like it's got a lot of church stuff, certain things they were dealing with. It starts about 1072-3. It starts after the Battle of Manzikert because it doesn't have the Battle of Manzikert, but it's before he's emperor. So it takes it starts in the 1070s, and it goes to 1118, and it's after the schism. It's after the schism, but not too far after. It's still a fresh wound between the Greek and Latin churches. So it kind of gives a view post that. Keep in mind the Byzantines are constantly at war with the Normans, who were a Catholic group from France, and then who were harassing them. So that kind of put gasoline on the fire in terms of the schism. But on top of that, historical value aside, and there's plenty of historical value, this is a beautiful piece of literature. So if you love literature, this is just a genuinely good read. It's almost 500 pages. It's pretty long for a 12th century book. It's written by the daughter of Alexius Comnenus, who had access to all. Her name's Anna, and Sheeta had access to all the imperial archives. So yeah, no, it's beautiful. Does
it ever engage in any of that spicy imperial gossip?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And there's vendettas too. I love it, and this comes straight from the court. And another thing about Alexius, he was a theologian himself. Him and his wife Irene would study scripture, the church fathers, specifically Maximus the Confessor. And his goal, he wanted to see the Muslims, both Turk and Arab, come to Christ. It's actually quite touching. He's a good guy. I quite like him. But yeah, and unlike the first one, this one's published by Penguin, so it's dirt cheap. All right. Let's go number 3, Paul.
100%. All right, number 3 is the OG himself, Herodotus, and his histories. He is called the father of history for a reason. He is literally the earliest guy we have who has written a work that can be fit in the genre of history. So that alone is massive value. And the awesome thing is, so he is from the. I'm trying to hang on. Let me try to remember just to make sure I don't want to accidentally butcher something as basic as that. Yes. Okay. Yep. Thought so. So he is from the 5th century BC, which is ridiculously early for writings of antiquity. We have barely anything in comparison to later antiquity. We have barely anything that survives from then, let alone of this size. This is the Penguin Classics volume I have. I'm not normally a fan of Penguin, but whatever, it's serviceable. But if you notice, it is thick, very thick, and it's not large typeset either. So this is a very big work from a very early period, and of course, big debates, and a lot of people have questions, historians and that, over his accuracy in certain parts. At least from what I've heard, over time, as like more archaeological stuff gets dug up, like it tends to vindicate Herodotus more and more. But I think there's also some bits where he's been shown like, yeah, I think he got kind of duped by like the Egyptian priests or something like that. I hear about that one a lot. Apparently Egyptian priests love to lie to outsiders, which is a kind of a funny thing. So there's that. But nonetheless, what's also really intriguing about this is that it shows how the genre of history was really originally conceived of. Today, we more or less conflate history as a genre, as a work with chronography or chronology or chronicles and that. But from Herodotus and for many writers of antiquity, of history and antiquity onwards, it wasn't just a telling of events. In fact, primarily this can be kind of considered like a travel log, kind of like a travel guide, actually, because he goes from place to place and he doesn't just talk about events in the past. He actually spends a lot of time talking about current culture, the makeup of the place and all that jazz. And then he'll talk about certain like key historical facts and tidbits and such. And he does that for a bunch of different places. He as historians did back then, the good ones at least, they traveled around to the places where they wanted to study, because you didn't exactly have your Google back then, of course. But that's why this is so valued. It shows history as a genre as was originally conceived, and it shows the guy who more or less defined it for antiquity. He was extremely famous, both loved and hated by various authors, including by Lucian himself. Actually, I think he actually criticizes Herodotus at certain points. Sup, Elijah? Good to see you. But yeah, extremely awesome, extremely valuable, and in particular, I've used him because when I did a brief teaching stint once at a high school. Fun fact, I was studying to be a teacher. Not anymore though, because I don't want to be kept down by that red tape, and it is so worth it now that I have the channel that I just started to do that. But anyway, I used him in a thing I taught for 11th grade, basically on the history of the Achaemenid Empire, because he does actually have stuff to comment on that. And he'll talk about he does talk about things like with Cyrus the Great, for example, his various conquests, and other things. So just an extremely crucial source to take account of, not uncritically, but nonetheless extremely important, foundational to history as a genre in general. Again, he is called the father of history, and for good reason.
Well, and think, like we think like 2,500 years ago. I mean, that's so far ago. That's pre-Christ. That's even like just think for a second though. Like in school, you probably learned about like Captain Cook and the British Empire colonizing Australia, etc. In Canada, it's very similar because that's those few centuries are someone. So if you're a Christian in the 1st century, who's partially educated, you're probably very familiar with this work. there's a good chance St. Paul had probably read that work, and certainly a lot of the early Christians, because it's like that's like the stuff he talks about is like the history of Captain Cook for Paul, or the history of Sir John A. Macdonald, Battle of the Plains of Abraham for me. That's seems like a long time ago, but if you're a first century Christian, that's what you're going to learn in your equivalent of school back then.
Perhaps. Not sure how much it was used, but it was certainly big. A lot of people knew it.
Okay. Now I'm going to go, we're on 3. Yeah, my 3. The correspondence, so this is a collection of letters of Pope Gregory VII. Now, Pope Gregory VII, there's something called the Gregorian reforms. Now, I don't much like that word because it implies that Pope Gregory did the whole thing, where about half a dozen popes can be given credit for it. It was a team effort. Certainly he did plenty. And like it's got a collection of epistles or so, about 80 of them in total, and like they're all in chronological order, and so like it's kind of a biography almost. It's called The Correspondence of Pope Gregory VII, and like you kind of get a sense what's going on in Europe. He's sending letters to certain kings, King of France, King of Hungary, to this archbishop, to the abbot of the Cluniac monastery. He's sending letters to Catholics who lived in places like Northern Africa, because we tend to think all of Latin North Africa was swallowed by the Islamic empires, and eventually that was the case. But at the time of Pope Gregory, he's still corresponding with the Church of Carthage, the Catholics in Carthage, right? And again, it's similar to this. It's about the same time period. Their lives overlapped. It has to do, pretty much gives you a view of the church in Europe after the schism, with the Holy Roman Empire in Italy, Spain, and probably the most important guy of this era. And yeah, it's an easy read. It tackles a lot of stuff that was relevant at the time. He even contemplates about going on a crusade. And him actually leading the crusade himself, and not like how it eventually happened, to where the Pope calls a crusade a couple decades later, and a bunch of lords go. He envisioned the crusade as him leading the crusade along with all the lords. And a lot of people think that the schism with the Greeks and Latins happened. They'll say, 1054 is just a date. It actually happened much later. But in 1071, he has a letter where he says the Greeks and Latins are no longer in communion because they disagree on the Holy Spirit. So there's that kind of squashes that myth, and a bunch of other myths will be squashed too. And it shows, you probably heard of Canossa with Henry IV dressed as a homeless person begging to be let back into the church. It's weird that Pope Gregory VII and Henry IV, prior to that, a few years prior, used to be the best of friends. It was like Obi-Wan and Anakin, and it ended like Obi-Wan and Anakin, essentially. That's for Father James, if he's listening, and all Star Wars.
Oh man!
All right, I'm done.
So how much did he contribute? Like, do you know in specifics of how much he contributed and what he contributed to the Gregorian reforms, or?
Well, he was like the three big things about Gregorian reforms were lay investiture, like kings appointing bishops. That's a no-no. Enforced clerical celibacy, which had lapsed, and a whole bunch of canon law stuff, because a lot of canon law stuff was like local and stuff. He was probably the most important person of that. Of course, you got Pope Leo the Ninth, you got Pope Alexander II, and a couple popes after him as well. So I'd say he's the most important, but certainly don't forget the rest of them. And especially, I think his biggest mark with the whole episode of Kenosha, that was the biggest slap in the face of lay investiture. I think pretty much at that point, that was the nail in the coffin of lay investiture for several centuries. It was the subsequent popes who finished off clerical celibacy, because there was some places in northern Italy, I think Milan, that didn't ditch clerical celibacy until the 12th century. So yeah, he played a big role in ending lay investiture. That's his mark on it, I'd say.
Okay, fair enough. All right, now, if Herodotus is the father of history, Eusebius is the father of church history. Goes without saying. I think anyone watching who watches Rules channel or watches mine, they probably know everything they need to know about Eusebius, but we're going to say it anyway. Of course, father of church history, first man of his kind. He himself literally says so in the prologue, that no one has embarked on what he's going for before him. Basically wholesale creating the genre of ecclesiastical history, of looking at the various places where the church is, what they're like, what they do, and their history from the apostles up until now, among other things, including and especially various major events. And so, just like Herodotus, he is extremely important, because there would be a whole genre that would follow him. There would literally be there's a ton of works you can find after him that are all called the exact same thing, ecclesiastical history. And in fairness, you can actually find like the pagan histories as well, where they'll often have specific names, like the rise of the Roman Empire by Polybius in the Penguin Classics edition. But actually, it's just called the histories. Like, tons of works were just called histories back then. And so it's likewise with ecclesiastical history. Lots of works, whether it's Eusebius, Socrates, Scholasticus, Sozomen, you name it, all called the same thing, ecclesiastical history. But
Evagrius, that's a classic.
Yeah, Evagrius as well. Galasius too, and of course Philostorgius, who I'll get to soon. But basically, invented the whole genre, necessary therefore to take a look at what he says. And his key value in particular is that he either alludes to, or names or directly quotes sources he uses at a really high frequency, much more than I've seen with other ancient historians, which is crazy, because lots of sources that we don't have in our possession today, we either would not have any fragments of, or we'd have less fragments of, or we wouldn't even know exist if not for Eusebius's testimony. Best example of this by far, you can see in book 5, chapters 23 to 25, where he talks about the Easter controversy. Virtually everything we know primary source-wise comes from Eusebius, because he quotes multiple letters from the Easter controversy in the late 2nd century that we do not have preserved anywhere else, which makes him absolutely essential, insanely valuable. Now, of course, like Herodotus, but probably not to the same degree, there can be questions of his reliability at points, which is fair, but I do also think it can be overplayed sometimes. I genuinely do believe that. But the great thing is that you can even see, because of when he quotes his sources, you can even see sometimes, like, he will give you the opportunity to see what he's inferring from the sources he quotes, and like kind of challenge him a little bit. Like, I've even done that on with respect to some citations of his in the Easter controversy. Like, I think at least one of his citations paints a different picture of the structure of the Roman hierarchy than he seems to imply, which of course we definitely still need to do a stream on that, by the way. But that's what's so fantastic about him, because he's an extremely early source, uses lots of stuff we don't have in possession today. So early 4th century, by the way, people. So absolutely essential for studying church history. And he preserves a lot of stuff that we don't have today. So absolutely essential purchase if you're gonna or read, because you can find it online as well. Likewise with Clement and almost pretty much everything I've cited so far, except this last one, which I'm going to get to. Everything I've cited so far you can find online, but otherwise the editions I have, I highly recommend you get. Maybe except the Penguin Classics Herodotus, because I just hate Penguin Classics in general. But yeah, so absolutely essential. Pick this up.
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment about those. That church history was considered so good that pretty much everyone out there's a ton of other church histories that Paul talked about. They all take off from where he left off. They don't see any need to repeat what happens in the 100s or 200s. They're like, he did a fantastic job. There's no point. We're just going to continue on. So you have people like Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret, Jerome, Evagrius. They're all covering the tons of multiple sources for those things, but in that early stage it's only the one because it was considered so good. And there is one more thing I'm going to say about that. I'm sure, Paul, you've come across this as well, that in terms of Eusebius, there are so many people who haven't read that. Like, it's a very underread book.
Yep.
We just assume everyone's read it. Oh, Eusebius, I hope you read it. But it's very underread. And I encourage everyone, if you're going to start church history, start with, I'd say, the Apostolic Fathers and Eusebius.
Yep. 100%.
All right, my turn, and I'm going to go back east. The Chronicle of Theophanes the Confessor. Now, technically, the Chronicle of Theophanes starts in 284, but like that is like 300 English pounds to buy online. So you can get this from 602 to 813, and it's that's the part I'm interested in anyway. So there's tons of stuff prior to that. But this, I just checked, $30 Canadian. And it's a good source if you're trying to learn about like the church, the war between Heraclius and the Persians, the rise of Islam, because this guy was a monk in Constantinople in the 8th and 9th century. The rise of Islam, the 6th and 7th Ecumenical Council. Of course, he talks about all the things leading up to them. And like a bunch of, there's stuff to do with the Blessed Virgin in here, the church calendar. He brings up feast days, so it knows they were celebrating certain feast days when. There's a lot of secular history as well. So a very good source. And I just got to say, this is $30 Canadian. I just checked on Amazon. I probably purchased and read this book about 5 years ago. This book I'm always checking. I've checked this book probably at least once a month for the last 5 years. So I use this book all the time. There's some books I read, they'll stay on the shelf probably till the day I die. I'm not going to open them again. This is one where I use all the time. Very helpful. Very important source. So if you're kind of looking for the bang for the buck, $30 Canadian, can't go wrong with this. So yeah, and a monk in Constantinople. He's a saint, actually, Theophanes, in the Catholic and Orthodox Church. He's probably an Anglican saint too. And no, it's a great addition, and it goes like per year. Like per year, this happened, and it's got both years, the like from creation, and it's got the modern day to like 699 AD. And very important stuff. So much covered. It's not that long. It's about 200 pages, but the content you get is just, I can't praise enough. In terms of all the books, the bang for the buck is this one, of all the ones I've showed today.
I've found the full work on Amazon, and it is $441 US, bruh.
Yeah, 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 and yeah. So just save some cash and buy 602 to
Honestly,
813 because
I'm actually kind of interested in it. Like, if there's a shorter version that includes the very beginning, I'd get it because it actually starts at 284, which is really interesting. That's right in my favorite period. So that's really interesting. Maybe either I don't think there's a shorter version that includes that, but maybe one day I'll just like save up brute force to get it.
yeah, start saving because it ain't
Yeah.
cheap. But again, this one is cheap. But I kind of be interested in knowing what happens there. But yeah, I guess I'll have to save up several hundred American dollars.
Or find a PDF. No comment, no endorsement.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. My last source right now this is not one you can read online. Unlike all the other ones there, which you can find somewhere or another online to read. Actually, I don't know if you can find Lucian's online in itself. Maybe you can. I'm not sure. This one you definitely can't. And thus, I have never seen it come up in relevant historical discussions in like apologetic stuff between Romanists, Easterners, Protestants, and all that jazz. Even though it definitely should, because this is the surviving fragments of a church history by a early 5th century author by the name of Philostorgius. Now, Philostorgius was a Eunomian, or in other words, more popularly known as an Arian.
Yeah, that was a subgroup of Arians. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, he was an Arian church historian, who mostly covered. I'm trying to remember the exact time period, but I believe it's like
it's very similar to like Socrates and Sozomen.
More or less, yeah. Basically, Constantine onwards, up until around his time, I believe. And he also has some coverage of the events of the Council of Nicaea. And so the work itself does not survive, but we do have a lot of fragments of it, whether it be quotations or summaries and all that. One of the most important, probably actually the most important one, being the summary of Photius of Constantinople, because he has a work called the Murio Biblion, which is basically a big book recommendation library catalog, including with many where he names works and gives summaries of them and basically recommends them some way or another. And it includes a lot of works, and he's in the 800s, if I'm not mistaken. He includes a lot of works which do not survive today. One of them being Philostorgius, at least not in its full form. What's really helpful is that he actually gives a really detailed summary of Philostorgius' work. He'll say, and this is book 1, and in book 1 he says this. Book 2 he says this, and this. And so, Photius' summary of Philostorgius basically acts as the backbone for organizing all the attested fragments of Philostorgius' church history. And so you'll have the summaries of Philostorgius given in each section, but then also other fragments from other authors given elsewhere. And the work tries to highlight what are most likely like direct quotations and all that jazz, and kind of emphasize them. And so nonetheless, even if the original thing does not survive, we have a very wide attestation of what it did actually say. And again, the key value with this one is that this is a very rare look into the opposing parties in church history, what they saw. And if I'm not mistaken, even he actually praises Eusebius, if I remember correctly, towards the beginning. That's just how everyone just loved Eusebius.
Well, he kind of had some Arian leanings, Eusebius.
I like to mostly question that, but in any case, that's another topic for another time. Even then, though, his leanings,
we got to discuss it. Yeah.
Even then, though, his leanings were nowhere near like Eunomianism.
Oh yeah, no.
But in any case, extremely useful because he gives the other ideas, other perspectives on the controversies in the church history from the perspective of a Eunomian. So very, very interesting. Doesn't always mean that he just contradicts everything that other authors like Sozomen and Socrates say, because otherwise he'll record events which are like kind of indifferent between them. But in any case, extremely useful and very helpful. And dare I say, essential if you're going to be studying this period and these controversies. Because this is a very rare insight we get into the words of the losers, the rightful losers.
Okay, I got a question about that. You'd put that ahead of Socrates or Sozomen then?
In a way, I do, just because, well, their works we have in our they survive. We have them, so in that sense, they have more integrity. I only put it ahead because of how underappreciated it is. Like, everybody, you can see online, everyone cites Sozomen and Socrates and all that jazz. Never have I ever seen anybody in our circles, in our spheres, cite Philostorgius. And I think that's just because you can't access them on New Advent. Let's be real, because that's basically everyone's like repository for that's not the right word. Whoops, depository for for their historical stuff. But people do need to get the mind of the historian, the authentic mind of the historian that's able to go out, find things which aren't easily available, or which people just don't talk about. I actively search for something. I think I remember encountering it like by accident a long time ago, and then eventually I thought, oh yeah, I remember this thing, so I decided to buy it, and wow, it's really valuable. I recommend it so highly because of how much of a rare insight it gives into an opposing view of church history, or a view of church history from an opposing party. It's not like they contradict everything everyone else says. And that's why I so highly recommend it, because it is very unique compared to Sozomen and Socrates.
Well, before I give my number one, someone asked a very important question. Elijah, did anyone do Saint Bede? Well, I haven't so far, no. But my number one is,
of course,
Ecclesiastical History of the English People by Venerable Bede. What a beautiful name, Bede. It's a shame no one uses that name anymore, or at least not that often. This book is a great English history written by an amazing saint. And a thing I like about this one, I'm Catholic, other Paul's Anglican, but keep in mind, we come from the English-speaking world. Like I'm Canada, former colony of England, Australia, former colony of England. Lots of people from the States, former colony of England, although they split in a very different way. Canada and Australia split in a way better ways, in my opinion. Anyway, but and of course, tons of people from England as well. And this is the spiritual heritage of all of us. This is the earliest English Christianity. There are some references to earlier times, but it's not that thorough. This is very comprehensive. It talks about synods. It has creeds produced at synods in this, and it talks a lot about the veneration of relics and important kings, Christian kings, who converted who started this monastery. It just a wonderful read, just absolutely beautiful. I'm going to kiss this book now. Mwah. See there. That's how much.
Is this like a relic now or something?
Have you read this book?
No, I haven't, but I want to.
No, it's a gem, and it's still pretty early too. Like it's still considered. I mean, I think Bede dies in 735. The Chronicle ends in 730, 32 or something like that. So it's still considered early church, although certainly in the latter half of early church, kind of on the cusp of late patristic, early medieval. And there's, just so much. It's our heritage, guys. Of all us English speakers, this is our spiritual heritage.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you agree with his theology or not. And that's my number one.
There you go. Sick as. Yeah, that's a great source. I remember, I think I've seen it at my local Christian bookshop. I think I've seen it there in the history section. You just know me. I just don't like the Penguin classics. I have like a very bad taste in my mouth with them.
Why?
Multiple reasons, both because of how like their front, their like cover design, like the black thing and the white text and all. I just really don't like it. I don't know why. I just really don't like it. The quality of the paper, I hate it. But in one particular special instance with the history of Polybius, the rise of the Roman Empire, it does not tell you that they actually cut out big points of it and abridge it. Basically, they cut out a number of sections. It doesn't tell you that at all, from what I've seen, and it's just got me ripped off. So I just do not like Penguin classics.
Well, you want to know something? We just talked about Eusebius. My paper copy of Eusebius, guess who it's published by? But they also publish stuff that a lot of stuff that is that's not available elsewhere. Like for example, the Chronicles of Jean Froissart. This is a priest who wrote during the 100 Years' War. And yes, it's abridged. They take certain sections out. Apparently, the actual version of Froissart is like 6 volumes, but it's got the highlights of the 100 Years' War. It's got the Conclave of 1378, which ended up with 2 popes, and one went back to Avignon. Now it's not full, but for something like this, the History of the Franks by Gregory of Tours, it's got the whole thing there. So I mean, yeah, no, like a lot of publishers abridge. Now, if they said for Polybius that they didn't say that, okay, I think that's a big deal. And
yeah, it's just I haven't read the full intro in fairness, but I just looked at the front, looked at the description in that. Nothing mentioned about an abridgment.
Oh, shame on them. Yeah, because in this, they're clear that they've cut parts out. Because like if you study the 100 Years' War, there's a bunch of no-name battles that had 100 people on each side that no one cares about. I'm not saying no one, but like the Battle of Crécy, Battle of Poitiers, things like that are all in here. Like all the important stuff. And I'm just glad I can have that. And they publish a lot of good stuff, Penguin, and it's pretty cheap, you know. Like who published?
It's cheap, all right.
Who published your version of Eusebius?
Oh yeah, this one. This is a really good version. It's published. I don't know if it's not self-published. This is published by Chronicle Academic. And what's fantastic about this one, A, it's a nice hardcover, but you can get a paperback version as well. But B, this is like a very recent, relatively speaking, translation by Paul Meyer. So very easy to read. And that the best part though is that it includes little essay. It includes like footnotes with like little notes on like commentary and that occasionally throughout the work. It includes essays at the end of each book that like talk about a major topic in the book. And then it also includes lots of pictures and maps. So it's really, really awesome. And most importantly, the formatting is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So it'll give the numbers. It even gives, throughout at certain points, like the date of when things are happening. So if you look here, it says 110, circa 110 from when this is talking. But then also clear paragraph divisions, and it actually puts quotations into block so that it's very easy to distinguish. It's best edition. In terms of translation, it's more of a dynamic translation, so it actually cuts down a bit of the fat of what Eusebius says. As a bit of an autist myself, I do kind of prefer to keep all the fat in just for accuracy's sake. But otherwise, he showed an example of how he cuts down on the fat, and it's nothing like essential. He basically just says what Eusebius says in its essence, just in less words, which is good. It's very helpful for readability. Other than that, though, this is the best edition I've seen.
Yeah, I'm not sure who translated the one they used for Penguin. Like, I mean, I could search it now, but it's currently in.
I suspect. either C.F. Cruz or who's the other guy? It's not Cursop Lake, I don't think. Oh no, I think it is Cursop Lake. Either C.F. Cruz or Cursop Lake. That's probably who.
Okay, yeah, I'll check that out later. That's interesting. Yeah, because that's important too. It plays a role. Like you want to have it all there, but at the same time, you want it to
Yeah.
be readable. So you always
Yeah,
got to
that's
go
it.
for
For,
the
for
nice
casual
happy medium.
for casual reading and easy reference, I'll use this one. But otherwise, for like super serious stuff, I'll use like the dual Cursop Lake Greek English version.
All right, we got a question for you, the other Paul. Are there any books of history on the North African Church?
Not specifically from what I can recall. You can find stuff that discusses things that happen in North Africa. I do believe Eusebius himself touches on it at points. Otherwise, though, it's mostly, from what I know, you're mostly just going to be reading stuff from there itself, whether it's Tertullian or, well, in particular, Cyprian and the councils of Carthage there. Those are going to be pretty important. Yeah, otherwise, I don't know anything super specific.
All right, I got one. There's an early church father in the 5th century. He wrote a biography of Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine is
Yeah.
from
Of course, yeah, Augustine, yeah.
So the translation of Sancti Augustini Vita, and the church guy who wrote this is named Pisidius, the bishop of Kelima. So so if you read that, it kind of gives a glimpse into the North African church. Now, of course, with the rise of Islam, it kind of put an end to the Latin church in North Africa, although it didn't happen all at once. And I did mention there's an epistle in here that Pope Gregory writes to the Church of Carthage, and it seems to be doing all right. I think the thing that put the nail in the coffin of the African church was the Almohad Caliphate. The same people who controlled Spain also controlled North Africa, because they eventually they had a policy that it was convert or die, and according to the Christian tradition, you have to give your life. You can't do taqiyya like the Muslims or like the Jews. They got something. If you have to give up your life to deny Christ, you got to do this. Point to your neck. Try to get it all in one swing. That's what we got to do. And that's what happened in like the 1200s with the Almohad. They abolished the demi status, and so they went from a minority to being extinct, essentially. That's what I think. There's not as much sources as we would like, unfortunately, because I think in terms of the church in Africa, the big player was Alexandria. Yeah, Carthage was somewhat important, but I think Alexandria was the big player, and there's tons of info on the church in Alexandria, and the Almohad Caliphate stopped at Egypt. So the Christians in Alexandria, they didn't have to be given the convert or die choice. They still got to be demis under the Islamic Empire at the time, which probably would have been the Fatimids or Ayyubids. Sorry, I'm late. Are we talking about primary sort, Paul?
No, it's just my scholars today. We're talking about our favorite scholars.
Yeah, we're talking about J&D Kelly and all of them, right?
Yeah, J&D Kelly, Dale Allison, you name it.
Yeah.
All the boys.
St. Posidius right here. Posidius, it's a good bio. Not too long, but IO, a fan of Lefebvre, Battlefields, Permanent. I've got one of Peter Battlefull's books. It's a collection of essays on the papacy. But I happened to get it fairly cheap. It's a book that's out of print. That's hard to find. Wrote Look at those Saint Augustine, but not. Oh yeah, John, you speak French. Je parle français aussi, parce que je suis né au Canada et c'est la deuxième langue officielle dans ce pays. Et pour moi, pour les années 1 à 6, tout en français. There you go, John.
C'est la même chose.
Ooh, avec toi aussi.
Sorry?
Avec toi aussi.
That's all the baguette that I can speak.
Okay, because it actually made sense in the context. All right. Crap, I'm late. Well, guess what? You can still ask questions. Okay, no. So that's pretty much all I have. Do you want to make some honorable mentions or something, or just say something?
Yeah, perhaps I can make honorable mentions. You know me as the big Irenaeus boy, so of course Irenaeus is against heresies. But also his demonstration of the apostolic preaching, which is one of the earliest, like, just complete summary demonstrations of like what the Christian faith is. And so it's super valuable that way. Against heresies as well, especially valuable for historical stuff, like with what various heresies taught, their origins and all that jazz. I'm just looking through my library right now. I would also say, if you're interested in seeing the various Gnostic beliefs, there's a collection of works from what's called the Nag Hammadi library, which is basically this this kind of ancient library discovered in Egypt last century that contains like a small library worth of like Gnostic writings, including stuff that was being interacted with in Irenaeus' day. So extremely valuable. You can find a full collection of those in a book called the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. So that's really essential if you're going to be studying those topics. Josephus goes without saying, his Antiquities of the Jews, Jewish War, and also Against Apion. That's a really, really interesting work too. What else we got? Aristotle's Politics, genuinely really good stuff. Yeah, not much else I can say. Yeah, I guess that's really all I have for now.
Okay, so I question for you.
Yeah.
Since these three people, their history Ecclesiastica essentially covers the same area. I'm talking about Socrates, Sozomen, and Theodora. Since those three essentially cover almost the same area, who would you say of those three is the one to start? If you had to pick one, because that's technically in the pre-600.
Yeah, I remember one of them, which it was either Sozomen or Socrates. I remember one of them being more detailed and impartial in a way. I'm not sure if it was Socrates or Sozomen. I'd have to look at that again, but I think it's the one who at the beginning he talks about like, oh yeah, he uses Eusebius, but Eusebius did also like inflate things or whatever. So he has like a critical eye to that. I think that was the good one, the better one or something. Yeah, I'm not totally certain because I haven't like read through them all or anything. They're all extremely useful. So yeah, I can't give like a hard and fast which one's better.
Yeah, like for me, I'd say, although I can't pick between them, I'd go with either. I probably wouldn't start with Theodoret. I'd do Socrates or Sozomen. I kind of got a soft spot in my heart for Socrates because he says something that's friendly to the Catholic position in terms of Pope Liberius. Like he doesn't mention
that's one of them, yeah.
Him signing the heretical creed, but Sozomen says he does. That's kind of an episode in church history where half the sources say one, half say the other. It's your point to pick and choose who you trust at that point. So, I mean, Socrates is that's probably one point in his favor, but that's purely for emotional reasons. I mean, obviously, I want the truth, no matter what happened. Friend was literally telling me how much I need to read Against Heresies.
Oh yeah, essential read.
So I'm just curious. Is there a reason that didn't make the list? I know you're a huge for you. I think of you, Paul. I think of the two early church things you love to death are First Clement and Against Heresies. Like those are your favorites.
That's it. Now that I like kind of think about it, maybe I should have put it in, but I guess like maybe why I didn't put it in was because like it's so ubiquitous. Although then again, so is Eusebius. But I thought his like monumental, the scale of his work was worth like mentioning. Otherwise, it was I guess like if I went again, maybe I would put him in. But I guess it's because I kind of stuck with stuff that was like more the most overall in that. Against Heresies does have a lot of wide information, but it is more specified than, say, Eusebius and Philostorgius, I guess, who are more general histories. And so I guess that's kind of what my focus was. Although First Clement isn't like a wide history either, but I picked that because of just how like foundational it is in certain ways. So yeah, I guess it just kind of depends on my mood.
Yeah, no, like it's tough. Like it's 5 books, right? So you have to pick your favorite 5. It's hard to find one. Like I'll just share this with this. I was debating. Okay, I could throw in John Kinemus, a Greek historian of the same period. I could have thrown in William of Malmesbury, who's a continuation of Venerable Bede. He takes off where Bede left off and goes until about 1100. There's the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which I just love to death. I love that piece of work. And there's others as well. You know, if you pick 5, it's hard to find that top 5. You know, these books are like our children. You know, so which the favorite.
Treat him very well.
Have you ever read any of Tacitus or Suetonius?
Yes, mainly Tacitus, not like a wide read through, but just some like I guess particular sections. The main thing I've read from him, my favorite bit, is his account of the destruction of the Second Temple, which is really interesting because both he and Josephus record some really supernatural stuff happening then.
Well, and there's also some interesting stuff reported in both Christian and pagan sources. In the case of Marcellinus Aemilianus, of what happens when the Jews tried to make another temple there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got smited. It's nice. I think Tovia Singer needs to read that. Yeah, you try to build that temple again. Almighty God is going to smite Netanyahu. You know.
And you're banned. Let's go. Jeff's here.
Yo, Jeff, you missed all the action, but you can still ask questions. We're still here for another couple minutes if you want to ask questions about all our favorite sources.
That's it.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's a lot of good stuff. What about maybe I'll think of like some little cool tidbits in the Apostolic Fathers. Maybe some like fun facts or whatever.
Have you read Gregory of Tours' History of the Franks?
No.
I just finished this today. It's like 5th and 6th century stuff.
Ooh,
Like,
actually, I do have sorry about that. I have a really cool fun fact about First Clement, which also plays into the issue of dating. There it is, bingo. All right, so first I'm going to bring up First Corinthians.
If you want, I can place it on the screen.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'll share my screen in a second with it. All right, there we go. Okay, so I'll share my screen with First Corinthians. If I can find it in the tabs, that is. There we go. All right, I'll zoom into it. So 1 Corinthians 16, basically the parting greetings and all that, or the goodbyes and all that. And towards the end, at the very where do we go? Are we both here?
Yeah, I'm here.
You got rid of us.
Yeah,
can you put us both back on?
Yes, I can.
Legend. Because I want to see your reaction too. So, end of it, he's giving his parting tidings, and he says, "Now I urge you, brothers, you know that the household of Stephanus were the first converts in Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. Be subject to such as these, and to every fellow worker and laborer. I rejoice at the coming of Stephanus and Fortunatus and Achaicus, because they have made up for your absence, for they refresh my spirit as well as yours. Give recognition to such people." Now, here is the farewell in First Clement, so chapter 65. It says, "Now send back to us without delay our messengers, Claudius Ephebus, Valerius Bede, together with Fortunatus." Very interesting. Now, the fact that Paul just gives the first names of these guys in 1 Corinthians 16 and not like the second or third names, because that was pronomen, nomen, and cognomen back in those days. The fact that he gives their single names makes perfect sense, because they knew these dudes. They knew these guys quite well. Now, the fact that First Clement here, they choose to give a fuller name for Claudius Ephebus and Valerius Bede, but then for this Fortunatus guy, just Fortunatus. I think that is a very strong indicator that it's the same guy that Paul is greeting with Fortunatus, and likewise in First Clement as one of the messengers for Rome. Very interesting, I think. What do you think of that? You think it's a certainty, possibility, stretch, what have you?
Well, what would be interesting would probably be to, like, you read a lot of Roman history, like how common is Fortunatus as a name? I know that's not
That'd be
going
the
to
key
give
question.
us an exact answer, like, because if you like Paul or Alan, the common names, but like my last name is Ruhl, Ruhl. That's not super common, right?
Oh.
So just see the frequency of that name. It's not going to give us a definite answer, but like seeing that connection though kind of reminds me of in the synoptic gospels, where Simon of Cyrene is carrying the cross. Only in the Gospel of Mark does it give further information, and that's how we know the Gospel of Mark was written at the Church of Rome, because it talks about two friends of Cyrene.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, a certain man from Simon of Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus. And then if you go to St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, it talks about one or both of them. I can't remember offhand, but that's an indication that the Gospel of Mark was written in Rome. That's one. There's a couple other pieces of evidence as well. Eusebius, he in St. Peter's epistle, he said he says he's in Babylon. Like, okay, he's either in Iraq, which was not even part of the Roman Empire at that time. It was part of the Persian successor state of the Archimedes, and that, or he's in Rome. That's not our name for Rome. And according to Eusebius, he meant Rome. There's other, and of course, St. Peter is a source for the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah. I think, the Rufus connection is possible, although from what I've read, that is a very common name. But what, so that's definitely possible. What makes the Fortunatus one very significant, I've got this really good book by this guy called Thomas Heron that's all about basically First Clement and when to date it, and he argues for the early dating. And he has a small section on Fortunatus, and according to him, apparently Fortunatus was an extremely common name back then. I'd have to see what he appeals for that, but if he's right, extremely common name. He points out that it would be very odd to just give the first name of the guy and none of his other qualifying names unless he was someone who was well known to the Corinthians, which when you have that combined with the mention of a Fortunatus without any other name in First Corinthians, the glove fits.
Yeah, because I mean, First Corinthians, like if you taught to an academic at like a secular university, they'll say it's probably between 50 and 55. That's when they'll pick a date. That's the academic date. And I'd say it's around 50, maybe slightly earlier. But if we go 50 to 55 and you date First Clement to pre-fall of the temple, that makes sense. If Clement was written at like 95, where some people will place it, it's very unlikely that Fortunatus is still alive. So, I mean, I think that's an argument. Like, it's not a slam dunk, but it's an argument in favor of the earlier dating. And there's some more evidence on First Clement. Now, apparently, you're going to have a discussion on First Clement with Matthew.
That's right. Good old with our mutual.
That about that one?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. He actually suggested, because Craig Trulio was initially going to host that, but he had to bail out. So Matthew actually suggested you hosting it. If I don't know if you're keen for that.
What day?
Sometime like beginning of March, if you're keen for that. Sure. It's basically, we want to do he suggested initially, I think we want to do a discussion on like First Clement and what it says about the authority of Rome in that. So basically just something just over that, just overall and informal discussion / debate.
Yeah, I'd totally be up for hosting that.
Sweet.
And are you guys going to talk about it if they have the 3-tiered episcopacy or the 2-tiered?
Maybe. I think I will. I'm kind of giving away one of my cards here. I may raise that for one of my points. Otherwise, I don't want that to be the center of discussion. Although inevitably, if I do raise it, it's going to become, we're going to go endlessly on that. But that will be relevant. Because of course, Matt, Roman Catholic. At least from what I've seen, he does believe this lends credence to some view of Roman supremacy or whatever. And so I think it will be relevant what I think the ecclesial structure of Rome at that time was.
Yeah. One time I had a discussion with Father James, and like I think this is recorded on my channel, but I couldn't tell you when. Like, I'm trying to say, okay, the Pope's not the the Bishop of Rome is not supposed to have the authority that the First Vatican Council gives him. Okay, obviously an Anglican will think that, but how much authority is he supposed to have? And I'm like, is Pope Leo the Great, is it that kind of authority? He's like, no, that's too much. They've already gone overboard at that point. And I'm like, well, then who's the one who has the appropriate? And he said Clement. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. It's something to think about. I mean, I don't think he's too clear either way. I don't think you could prove or disprove a lot with Clement, in my opinion. Of course, you may take issue with that.
Yeah, I don't think it's well, more spoilers from my side. I don't think it's going to be like a hard disproof. I think it does give some data that mitigates against it, but other than that, I'll leave it to the discussion.
All right, so but if you guys want, I'm happy to host.
Sick as, I'll let him know.
Sweet. And if you got any last announcements to my audience, anything you're working on, where they can reach you?
Yeah. So basically the usual, my channel, The Other Paul, go find me there. Got a website with a blog, theotherpaul64.com. Got a subscribe star where you can support me monthly and you get really cool benefits from it at subscribestar.com. The link's in under all my videos, so you can find it there. I've got a Discord server called the Theocrat Lounge. You can also find that under my videos. Twitter as well, at The Other Paul 2, because some New York liberal already has that name. So when I made my Twitter, it had to be at The Other Paul 2, which is really driving my head in, but whatever. That's, you can find me on Gab as well. Gab is the good site, the one place I'm not going to be guaranteed nuked. So that's me.
All right. Well, and I'm just so I'm happy that you came on. It was good. You brought up some books I didn't expect. I'm gonna be I wrote them down. I'm gonna be having to take a look at a few of these.
Let's go.
All right. Well, all right. I'm signing off.
You got me mad excited about the Chronicle of Theophanes. Actually, I've got something to tell you about that after the stream. So yeah.
Ooh. All right. Well, I'm ending the stream right now, so you can tell me in about 20 seconds. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Share this video, like, subscribe to The Other Paul as well. And I'll see you later. God bless.